Wherapy. Therapy wherever, whenever.
Before I begin, let me give you a little bit of background information about myself. I'm a psychodynamic therapist. I work as a children's therapist by day, and on weekday nights and weekends, I work as an online therapist, treating people who are dealing with depression and anxiety for any number of reasons. And I treat adults as well as children. And My thoughts that I express in this podcast are based on my experiences of working these jobs and on the education that I've received as a psychodynamic therapist. And before I go into the first danger of diagnosis, I want to just caveat everything that I say in this podcast um, with by saying that I think that diagnosis can be a very good thing to have, especially if you receive rights to services in your local municipality, or if you receive the right to have medicine, or even if it only means that you understand yourself better. You know? There are a lot of good things about having a diagnosis, and by when watching different YouTubers or listening to different podcasts or seeing different opinions put up on social media, I can definitely see that people they latch on to certain minute things that people say in their podcasts or YouTube videos, and make a big thing out of that. And what I say in the coming I don't know how many minutes, but in the rest of this podcast, um, is I, are obviously negative aspects of having a diagnosis, but I don't want you to think that I'm only propagating for that side. Yeah, that I'm only saying that a diagnosis is bad and that you shouldn't have a diagnosis at all, and that you should completely just give up on that. Yeah. I'm I don't exist in that black or white world. Yeah. I want to kind of give my opinions here, with you also understanding that I think that having a diagnosis is a very good thing. But the first danger of diagnosis that I was thinking about um, was identifying as your diagnosis. Yeah. And this is something that I see in a lot of my clients, and this develops over time. So it's with a lot of clients who have been diagnosed with something for a longer period of time. And of course, they become aware of the limitations of their diagnosis. And I think that this is completely understandable if you have a physical diagnosis, if you have some sort of if you have epilepsy, for example, or if you have some physical handicap, or if you have some sort of personality disorder, then it can be very good to understand yourself. And it's obviously quite understandable that you identify with that because it's such a big aspect of you. But with diagnoses such as maybe gender dysphoria, for example, um, or in some cases ADHD, or but in most cases depression, because depression is quite a depression in terms of the actual criteria for depression is that you should only have a depression for 8 months, yeah, maximum. And if it's longer than that, then it's a clinical depression. Yeah. But what I'm trying to say is depression is something that a lot of people fall into every now and then, yeah, for some periods of their lives. And for most cases, it's for understandable reasons, but for other cases, it's not. You know? But it's more of a diagnosis that is close to all of us, even though we may not have it. But there are some people who, nonetheless, they identify with their diagnosis, the criteria for their diagnosis, and they also identify with the hinders, the limitations of their diagnosis. I can't do this because I am depressed. I can't go to the social event because I'm depressed. Nobody's gonna like me anyway. I can't go to this job interview because I'm depressed. I'm not gonna make a good impression anyway. I'm not gonna go to work because I'm depressed, or I'm not gonna go out of bed because I'm depressed, um, or I'm not able to like even maintain friendships because I'm depressed. What's the use of having friends when you're depressed? Yeah. And at the beginning of a depression, when you've been in a depression for maybe a month or so, then there is an obvious impact that the depression has on your energy levels. Yeah. You have a lot less energy when you're depressed, and therefore you can't do certain things. So at the beginning, this kind of way of thinking is understandable, even though it's something that we have to work with to change. But for a lot of people, it stays for even longer. Yeah? And when it stays for longer, this way of thinking, I mean, then it's become a part of your identity. Yeah? And then the depression has also become somewhat of a security blanket because you've almost forgotten how you were before you were depressed. Yeah? And if somebody holds you accountable for things as if you weren't depressed, then you don't really know how you're going to manage that. Yeah, all of a sudden you're responsible for your happiness. Yeah, you're responsible for things going a certain way, and you might be very scared because you've been depressed for quite a long time, and therefore you're probably not going to perform as good as you usually do. And there, instead of trying and failing and being held accountable for that, you would rather kind of identify with your depression and use it as an excuse to kind of cut off the accountability there. Yeah. And I'm not saying that everybody does this. I'm not saying that this is you, yeah, the person listening. But I'm saying that this is something that develops over time. Identifying with your diagnosis, and this can happen for a lot of people. Yeah, I also treat a lot of people who they are dealing with depression because they've been brought up in many different countries, so they have identity issues based on that. The term is third culture kid, or not the actual identity issues, but the term third culture kid applies to growing up globally, and they use that term also in the same way to kind of as a security blanket for the limitations that they are experiencing, yeah, and not kind of tackling that issue. Yeah, they're more I can identify with this place, and that's. And I have to move again, and I can't really settle because I don't feel at home here, or many different reasons. I just don't want to go into specifically that topic. Maybe I should bring that up in another podcast. But there are many different other ways that people identify with something that limits them. Yeah. And a diagnosis can definitely be a limiting factor. Yeah. In its nature, it is limiting. So that's my first danger of a diagnosis.